what we talked about this was a while ago. We haven't done one of these talks for a while, but we talked about like, what am I building, right? And the week before that, we talked a little bit about why did I build this? Like, what was the reasoning for this? So, in thinking of this career, your life, whatever you're building, whatever you're going towards, you have to think about how to get to that space. And communication, I feel like, is the most important out of all of that. Communication can either make or break relationships, make or break business partnerships. When you even just dial back to the point of an interview, right? An interview is all about you clearly communicating what skill sets you have. And if you can't do that, then you literally will put yourself in jeopardy of getting the job. So I really wanted to talk about how we can work through communication and see it at different levels and different parts. I broke it up into 4 specific spaces: mentality, skill set, confidence, and atmosphere. So, how many of you have ever felt disrespected in a conversation based on maybe what someone said to you, or which you might have said to someone else, right? So maybe you were the person who disrespected the other person. Show of hands. All right. I'm gonna pick on a few of you. I just need a few quick. Who feels comfortable to share what they felt during that time or why they felt disrespected? No, that's well.
For disrespect, I feel like maybe it's not necessarily like in a professional setting, but maybe more with my mom. Whenever we would fight, I think I would get really angry and just some words would slip, and I would disrespect her that way.
Cool.
And I feel like, in disrespectful sense, from that perspective, I feel like it's more of like maybe domination and making other people feel crappy because I'm feeling crappy or angry.
Thank you for sharing. Let's get one more person.
I can share. I mean, I don't have like a specific example, but sometimes I feel like disrespected when I feel like the other person isn't really like listening to me or like trying to understand like my perspective, and they're just kind of like putting words in my mouth.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big one. So we talked about feelings, right? If you feel like you had a crappy day and transferring that energy to someone else. We talked about domination, right? Saying the wrong words. We talked about people not listening to you, right? The word that really like made me think about this topic was transgressions. Do any of you know what transgressions mean? So transgression is a very like churchy word, but I don't know why this word literally, it was just in my notes. But transgressions is an act that goes against a law, rule, or code of conduct, or an offense, right? And when thinking of transgressions, it kind of helped me to write this out and think about it in those 4 perspectives. But when we all feel disrespected, or let's not even say, I feel like disrespected is a very strong word, but in life, you feel disrespected, and work, you feel like somebody just offended you, or like, I would say disrespected is still good. But in that space, it has to go. The reason why we feel in that manner is because it goes against something that we believe was a rule or a barrier, and then they pass that barrier, right? Or we have some type of code of conduct within ourselves based on our full experiences that if you say this one thing, that's disrespectful. But from the other person's perspective, they might not fully know that because they live by a separate code of conduct. And that's why communication is so important. Same way, from a creative standpoint, I might have a vision for something, but if I can't clearly communicate it to another person, then it's hard for them to clearly be able to create from that space. We all on the same page? We all got that? Cool. Thumbs up if you got that. Thumbs sideways, thumbs down if you lost. All right. So let's break it down into these 4 areas, starting off with mental. And I'm just going to run through kind of like a understanding of what I kind of put down for these. But mentally, if we think about mental in the space of like transgressions or disrespect, we have to think about how it relates, and especially when communicating to other people, how does, and before I even go into this, I'm speaking from the perspective of the person that we should be listening to. Does that make sense? Right? So let's just say someone says something and you don't clearly understand what they're talking about. So let's say mental, right? Mental state stems from relating to how you think or see the world, right? So that's their mentality, something that they've created in that space, right? The other part where we usually get in a disagreement or lack of understanding is within skill set, right? So when you think of skill set, that has to do with their abilities, right? So how many of you have ever thought about like, oh, why can't, and I think this is more relational, maybe less work related, but it can be a little bit of both. But if you talk to someone, let's say maybe some of y'all have had a significant other where you get in the argument and you say, why can't they see it from my perspective, right? Or why don't they think the way that I think, right? How many of you have had that issue? I literally just had that issue a few days ago. But that stems from, right? That stems from us, one, the mentality of the person, but the other part is it's their abilities, right? Their ability to see something that we don't see the same way that they see it, right? Or the skill set, maybe they're a little bit more sensitive and you're completely blocked off from your feelings, right? Those are some of the things that can stem from that. The other part is confidence. So when we look at the definition of confidence, it stems from the feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something. And then the last part of that is firm trust. So when we see confidence, it has to do with them trusting us. And that has a whole nother context that we have to dive deeper into. But trust is so important, and confidence, because how can someone feel affirmed or have a feeling of belief if they don't have a space for us to establish trust? So we see a lot of those issues in the workplace, because if someone came from a toxic work environment and they did not trust their employees, that's easily going to transfer to this new space, and they're already going to be kind of wounded or have a lack of trust in that space. So we got to go about rebuilding that. And then the last part of that is atmosphere. So atmosphere is the pervading tone or mood of a place, situation, or work of art. And that kind of self-explanatory, but like the atmosphere of where that person is in is very important to speak to. How am I thinking through it, right? I can give an example of atmosphere, and then I'm going to go back and give some more examples of these other ones. But when we think of like why atmosphere is really sticks out or is important to the way that someone thinks, is I was just staying with a friend, and like all of us, I'm sure we've been on a date where we'll text the person and we're trying to figure out, well, let me explain it from a dating perspective, right? If you're dating someone at the beginning stages, you're trying to figure out like, what is this? What are we doing? Especially as we go from date 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, right? We're trying to figure out what's going on with this. And we can get in our head because of the texting cadence of how we're texting the other person. If they text us back super fast, what does that make us feel? Anyone? That makes us feel like they're interested in us. They text us slow, that means they're probably not interested, right? And we all have gone through that. But your atmosphere of understanding that is so important. So this person was literally just on TikTok constantly, and on their TikTok is crazy with their algorithm. It literally speaks to every single thing that whatever you like and on TikTok. So in her atmosphere of watching TikTok, all she saw was like jokes on, oh, this person is your boyfriend or your significant other in that space. But then you go back and you realize they didn't have the same outlook or perspective. So if you're watching TikToks about that constantly, now that slowly creates an atmosphere for yourself to think, oh, am I doing the same thing, right? Now I'm second guessing what that person is texting, or even if they're not texting me back, am I the person in the TikToks who's thinking this person is my significant other and they really don't think like that, right? So as that spews over into our brain, it starts to take over, right? It might just be the first one where it's like, oh, that's a joke. And then by the time you get to TikTok 5, 6, now you've created an idea that this is your whole world and it's stuck within inside your mentality as well. Now you're moving within a mentality of, oh, this is an issue and I'm actually messing this whole situation up, or I'm not really seeing the correct perspective on that, right? And then it affects your abilities, right? When we think of our skill set, it affects your abilities of thinking about this relationship in that space. Now, when we think of our abilities, I don't really want to go and put my all into it, right? I don't really want to do anything in that space. And then when we get to the confidence portion of it, right? In the confidence conversational portion of it, now I don't feel affirmed. I don't feel like I should trust this person. Now I'm closing myself off to this, which ruins our atmosphere that we all come back to, right? It's a full-on cycle of everything that we're going on, and atmosphere plays a big space into that. And you could do the same activity with each one. But at the end of the day, what we ended up talking about was saying, hey, I think you're looking too much into this TikTok, like jokes and all of that stuff, and it's clouding your judgment. Let's really go back and look at the evidence or what we actually see that's happening in this space. And her cadence of texting him was off. And then because of that, his cadence of texting her was off, but they ended up resolving and having a beautiful date, right? So like that's ultimately what happened, right? So it stems from this atmosphere, but really it could stem from any one of these areas. Does everyone get what I'm saying on that? I know I use dating as an analogy, but this is the same thing to think about within our jobs, right? And our job in these areas, when we think of mentality, right? Let's start with mental first. Our job in a mental space is to inquire and to understand first, not to demean. So how many of you, I'm sure, have had a situation where someone asking you a question, but it came off in a very demeaning way, right? I'm sure we've all experienced that. And because of that, we want to inquire on understanding what is their mentality when it comes to this space that we're communicating in, because otherwise then there's no equal language for us to clearly communicate with one another. Everybody feel good about that? The other part of it is seeing it from their angle. You may not 100% get it right away, but the goal of communication is to progress, right? It's not to be in this space of perfection. And I'm sure as artists and creatives, all of you understand sometimes your greatest piece of art is something that you messed up or you did by accident, right? So it's not in this space of perfection, it's in this space of progression. So the goal is to progress in understanding someone's mentality. And as you grow in that space, now you clearly get to understand them a little bit more and they understand you at the same time. The next part, skill set, right? So in that, the biggest thing that we sometimes negate is this person might be really good at one thing and you're good at something. And to you, whatever they might do might be a weakness or a space of opportunity to you. And your area, you're like, I'm really strong in that. So why can't you do it this specific way? Instead of having that perspective, where's the median ground, right? The middle ground of where you all can work together. How can you use what they're good at and how can they use what you're good at to come together and to improve in that space? That is super, super important. And it ties back to us progressing. We have to learn how to work with one another based on areas that they're great at and areas that we're good at as well, and find that median ground. But even in those weaknesses, or what we like to call spaces of opportunity, that's the progression of how we can grow. They can teach us the area that they're really good at, and we can teach them the area that we're really good at. And now we're growing in that space and improving as well. The next part is confidence. Confidence, we really have to understand what trust looks like to the other person, not to us, right? That's where we get things messed up. If we understand what trust looks like for us and we put those expectations on them, we've created a toxic atmosphere, because the atmosphere, you can't live in that space and have great trust in that. You need to understand where their trust stems from, and they need to understand where your trust stems from. And that's where communication is so important. That dialogue that you build with one another can help them to progress and help you all to build an area or an environment of trust. And then the other part of that is confidence is all about, really, when we think of confidence, it stems from insecurities, right? And childhood insecurities, life insecurities, dating insecurities, job insecurities, a bunch of different insecurities. So what can we do in that space? We can be the reassuring voice in that space. Even if that person does not reassure you, you can be the bigger person and help to reassure them, which ultimately might build some trust and some confidence for them to see that and be like, wow, I was rude to this person and they still reassured me. Maybe I should be doing the same, or maybe I can talk about it, or maybe that gives them the awareness to say, hey, I messed up in this situation, so I do apologize. Thank you for reassuring me, and I'm going to make sure I work on reassuring you as well. All about the progression, right? Not just looking for perfection, but growing to this place of progression. And then the last part with atmosphere, right? Make sure we're understanding their viewpoint. How do they see their environment? And some people are going to be super open with their atmosphere to say, hey, this actually stems from some childhood trauma. Other people are going to be blocked off, and you're going to have to work with them and let them share as they want to share, right? It doesn't have to be right away. The other part of that is being a positive light or space of hope to talk them out of their negativity or bad atmosphere that they might be stuck in. That's my example with the dating, right? With my friend, I had to be like, look, let's realistically look at this and say, hey, your texting cadence was off, his texting cadence was off. So let's just find the middle ground and just put ourselves out there, because ultimately that stems from some type of experience that my friend had of not trying to be vulnerable, right? And being vulnerable in a relationship. And this is why I always use dating examples. It's the same thing in work, right? You're not dating your coworker, right? Your ultimate goal is not to be in love, but the goal is for you to build trust. And to build trust, you have to be vulnerable with that person so they can be vulnerable with you, and vice versa. And that's what ultimately creates a trusting work environment. And then the last part of that is, if they are in it, you also have to sometimes give them time, and sometimes you have to move around, right? There are instances where someone might be in a toxic environment and they might not be open to having any dialogue. And that's okay. Give them space, give them time, and let them know, hey, when you want to talk, I'm here to talk, right? But don't force it onto them. Everybody feel good about that? Cool. So ultimately, when we think of communication, I want us to really focus on these 4 quadrants: mental, right, or mentality; skill set really talks to abilities; confidence; and atmosphere. These are 4 areas that we can truly identify within our situations. To add to this vulnerability space, I would like for us to share one example with someone in a breakout room on an area where you might have felt disrespected, or maybe you offended someone, and tie it back to, was it mentality, right? Was it mental? Was it skill set? Was it confidence? Or was it in their atmosphere? It might have been all 4 of those, and that's okay, right? And that can speak to a little bit about starting to work on this and try this out as you talk to some of your coworkers. This also could be great for your relationship, right? If you got a partner that you're pursuing or dating someone, utilize this. It's great self-help. I'm going to give you all the next 10 minutes to do these activities, and we'll go from there. Sound good? Thank y'all.